Hello friends, I am Dr. Pranav Khoche from Nutan Vidya Prasarak Mandals, Arts, Commerce and Science College, Lasalgaon. Our topic of discussion today is Types of Poetry Part 2 under SYBA Discipline Specific Course Appreciating Poetry. In the last lecture, we discussed three types of poetry. They are ballad, ode and sonnet. Today we are going to discuss elegy, dramatic monologue, lyric and epic. An elegy is a poem written to mourn the death of a close friend or a loved one. But at the same time, an elegy can also mourn the passing away of a golden period. Friends, a golden period means the period one likes too much, the period one loves very much. Such a period, such a time is called a golden period. So, it is a poem which is written on the occasion rather to mourn the death. Mourn means to express sorrow about someone's death. To mourn the death of a close friend or a loved one or the passing away of a golden period. Typically, elegy has some features. It talks about the cause of the loss. It expresses the sorrow about the loss. So, if the loss is someone's death, then it talks about how that person died, and it also expresses the sorrow about the death of the person. This is typical of an elegy. It also talks about the qualities of a dead person in a good manner, how that person was, what were his qualities, what were his virtues. So obviously these qualities of dead person are talked about in an elegy. Though the elegy is written to express sorrow or to mourn the death of someone, though the tone of elegy in general is sorrowful, is sad, is tragic, but in the end, an elegy expresses hope and consolation. Many a times, throughout the poem, the theme of death or the theme of sorrow pervades. But at the end, most of the times at the end, there is a hope, a ray of hope expressed, and some kind of consolation. Though the person is dead, though some loss has been done, though the golden period has passed away, but some kind of hope is expressed at the end of elegy. And friends, I suppose that this is a quintessential, this is a necessary element or feature of literature, that it gives you hope. After all the sorrows expressed, it gives you some kind of hope. One of the most famous, most well-known examples of this form, elegy, is a collection of elegies In Memoriam. The name of that collection is In Memoriam by Alfred Lord Tennyson, that expresses the sorrow for the death of his close friend Arthur Hallam. Friends, Arthur Hallam was his closest friend and he was also Tennyson's sister's husband. So that sorrow was obviously very grave, very serious. And Arthur Hallam died quite young, at quite young age. Besides talking about his great friend, his best friend, and expressing sorrow about his death, these elegies this particular anthology also talks about the passing away of the Golden Age and turbulence of the Victorian Age. Friends, the Victorian Age from 1837 to 1901 was a transitory period. It was a period of transition in the Europe because of industrialization, rapid devastation of environment, and unplanned urbanization. And while mourning the death of his friend Arthur Hallam, Alfred Lord Tennyson also mourns the passing away of the earlier period and how the Victorian age changed everything, how it destroyed the systematic old way of life when people believed more in God and they had faith. The next type in our discussion is dramatic monologue. See, if you look at the name or the title of this type, dramatic and monologue. Friends, monologue is spoken by a single person. Monologue rather means, because dialogue means there should be communication or conversation between two people. But mono, the prefix mono, stands for single, one. So it is a speech given by only one person. And dramatic, the word dramatic adds the qualities of drama. Now we will see how it is a dramatic monologue. So it is a poem in which a single person or character other than the poet speaks to a silent listener or listeners. In dramatic monologue, a single person, which is generally a character portrayed by the poet. So, poet does not speak in the poem, but rather he expresses his ideas through some character. And because there is a character and he speaks to silent listeners, there are listeners, there are audience in that poem, there are assumed audience in that poem, but they do not speak, they are silent. And because of this, the poem acquires dramatic qualities. This speaker, this single speaker, reveals his or her personality in the poem. And that too, sometimes consciously, but many times unconsciously, he reveals innermost personality, his innermost personality, while he speaks about himself. Or he speaks about the situation, he comments on the situation, or he may speak about other people. This particular feature gives dramatic monologue a psychological aspect because the speaker, while speaking, reveals his own personality. Though he is talking about, he or she is talking about other people. The Victorian poet Robert Browning perfected the genre of dramatic monologue through his poems such as My Last Duchess, The Last Ride Together, Andrea del Sarto, Porphyria's Lover, The Bishop Orders His Tomb at St. Praxis. Browning's monologues often shock the readers as the speaker reveals negative or dark sides of his personality. For example, in the dramatic monologue My Last Duchess, the Duke of Ferrara is talking about the portrait of his Duchess. Right? Duke is an officer, was an officer in a royal court, right? A high officer. And here that officer, that Duke, talks about the portrait of his Duchess. But as the poem comes to the nears to the end, he gets more and more negative while talking about his wife, his last wife. And he suddenly reveals that he murdered his wife. The lines are, I gave orders, then I gave commands, and all smiles stopped together. So while he is talking quite badly, quite in a negative manner about his last wife, we are not ready for such a great shock that he might have murdered his wife. But he, while speaking to the emissary, he reveals this that he has killed his last wife. He has given orders to kill his last wife. And that is really shocking. In Andrea del Sarto, the Andrea del Sarto means Andrea, the son of a tailor. This also is a dramatic monologue in which this tailor is speaking to his wife. In My Last Duchess, the Duke is speaking to an emissary. In The Last Ride Together, a lover is speaking to his beloved and talking about their love and other subjects like politics, war, etc. But here in Andrea del Sarto, Andrea is talking to his wife. Obviously, all these listeners are silent. And while he is talking about his wife, her lover, his wife's lover, whistles from down, from under the window. And this is known to us by Andrea del Sarto's words, hear the whistle again, go my love. So in this way the poem shocks us. Porphyria's lover is perhaps the most shocking of Browning's dramatic monologues, because here a lover is talking about his beloved who is near him, and the situation is that as he tells, she has come from her parents' house and she had come to meet him for the last time because she has to marry some other person. But the shock comes when the lover tells us, while she was speaking like this, he strangled her with her own hair. She has long golden hair and he strangled her with her own hair. And that is really a sudden shock that the poem gives us. The bishop orders his tomb at St. Praxis talks about a bishop who is on his deathbed and he is muttering in a kind of delirious state, in an unconscious state. He is muttering, and at the same time, when he gains consciousness for some time, he talks to his sons, though here the silent listeners are his sons, and probably, as the poem suggests, they are his illegitimate sons. And throughout the poem, he reveals unconsciously his personality, which is immoral, which is corrupt, while he is a bishop, that is a high religious officer. Alfred Lord Tennyson was another great Victorian poet who also wrote memorable dramatic monologues like Ulysses and Lotus Eaters. The famous Ulysses from Homer's Odyssey has come back to his home island, that is Ithaca, but because he is habitual of continuous adventures and continuous honors, he is bored by his domestic life and domestic duties. Here in this poem, Ulysses is talking to his mariners, to his sailors. and he is encouraging them to go again with him on a voyage. He also talks about his condition and says how dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use, as though to breathe were life, life piled on life, were all too little, and of one to me little remains. So, this dramatic monologue, Ulysses, presents an ambitious, heroic, brave person who has become old, but at the same time, he has ambition to go beyond the sunset. He has an ambition to gain as much as knowledge and experience as he can in his life, of which little is remaining, little remains. This particular character of Ulysses presented by Robert Browning in this dramatic monologue also expresses the motto of Victorian age, that was the quest for knowledge. The form of dramatic monologue was also brilliantly explored by the modernist poet T.S. Eliot in his poem The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which presents an undeciding nature of modern man. So friends, dramatic monologue is a major form of poetry, major type of poetry, in which a character is presented, and because he speaks as a character, he talks about the situation, the title dramatic, and because he speaks alone, monologue is quite appropriate. The next form of poetry or next type of poetry is perhaps the most common, that is lyric, because any other type of poem can be lyrical. So ode can be lyrical, elegy can be lyrical, sonnet can be lyrical. So let's see the exact nature of a lyric. The form takes its name from lyre, as such poem was to be sung to the accompaniment of a lyre, a string instrument like a violin. Lyric has the musical quality that originates from the simplicity of stanza, tuneful rhyme scheme, and rhythm. So generally, when we talk about the specific type of lyric, it is the simplicity of stanza, its tunefulness, its musical quality that attracts us. The lyric is also one of the most personal forms of poetry. It is one of the most personal forms of poetry because it expresses the poet's intense feelings and emotions. While in dramatic monologue, the poet presents a character other than himself or herself. In lyric, the speaker most of the times is the poet himself or herself. Imagination, use of imagination, vivid imagination, music and feelings, intense feelings are features of lyrical poetry. As I said earlier, elegy, sonnet, ballad are also lyrics as they have a musical quality. A Red Red Rose by Robert Burns, The Table Turns and Daffodils, a very famous poem by William Wordsworth, are good example of this particular form, which is very simple in nature. So in very simplistic manner, if we describe lyric, it is a song. It is a poem which is very much like a song. The last type in our discussion is epic. In Marathi or in Hindi, we can translate epic as Mahakavya. So, an epic is a long narrative poem. So, ballad is also a long narrative poem, but epic is quite lengthier and quite vast in scope than ballad. So, an epic is a long narrative poem, the length of which can run into volumes. There can be several volumes of a single epic. There can be several books, there can be several parts of a single epic poem. The hero of the epic poem is an ideal human being of great stature, of great status, and moreover, upon whose actions the fate of entire humanity can depend. So, we'll discuss this description again. That first feature is it's a long narrative poem. It is so long that there can be volumes, several volumes of that poem, of that single poem. Second feature is the speciality about the hero, who is an ideal human being of great stature, of great status. And moreover, upon his actions, whatever he does, whatever he acts, upon that the fate of entire world, entire human race can depend. Therefore, as said earlier, the total scope of the epic is very vast. Another definition or description of the epic is the term epic is applied to a long narrative poem composed on a serious subject. So friends, this is another part of the epic, that is, it is necessarily serious. The topic or the subject or the theme of the epic is always serious. It is told in a formal and elevated style. This definition talks about the style or language of the epic. It is told in a formal and elevated style, in figurative language, using many figures of speech. The language, the topic, the characters, everything in the epic is grand. And epic is centered on a heroic figure on whose action depends the fate of a tribe, a nation, or the entire human race. So these two definitions are a little bit different. In the second definition, or the second definition talks about the style or language of the epic poem. Here is a picture, representative picture from Paradise Lost, perhaps the first English epic by John Milton. It describes the topic of epic, the biblical theme. Here, Paradise Lost has a biblical theme, that is a theme from Bible, which is fall of man from paradise. And it shows that how man was, that is Adam and Eve. They show the Adam and Eve, how they were driven away from the paradise because they tasted the forbidden apple as described in the Bible. And the epic also talks about how Satan, the archangel, the enemy of God, who revolted against God, how that Satan was thrown from heaven by God. And to avenge this particular action of God, Satan went to the paradise where Adam and Eve were living happily, and he tempted Eve to eat that forbidden fruit, that is forbidden apple, and from that forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve got knowledge. And then the misery of man began, and man was Adam and Eve, they were also because of their first disobedience. The first disobedience of man is the theme of Paradise Lost, and how they were driven away from the very paradise in which they were kept earlier. The earliest example of the epic in Western literature is Odyssey by the Greek poet Homer, in which there are mainly adventures of Odysseus or Ulysses and related other stories. It also focuses on the Trojan War, the War of Troy. The Anglo-Saxon period, that is the early English period, produced Beowulf, the earliest English epic. But unfortunately, who wrote this first English epic is not known. But it can definitely be called as the first Old English epic, the earliest English epic. Paradise Lost by John Milton is an English epic centered on the biblical theme of the fall of man that we just saw in the image. For us, for Indians, Ramayana and Mahabharata are the world-renowned examples of ancient Indian epics. We very well know the stories of Ramayana and Mahabharata, but during the thousands of years, many additions have been done in these epics that we perhaps do not know. But still, they can be called two of the greatest epics in world literature. Friends, I very well know that such short introductions or short discussion about these poetic types or types of poetry are not enough. But for our purpose, it was just an introduction so that you will be able to identify these types when you read various poems, and you will understand them, you will appreciate them, as the title of our paper tells, you will appreciate them in a better way. So friends, in this lecture, we discussed Elegy, that is a poem written to mourn the death of someone or even passing away of a golden period. Then we talked about dramatic monologue, in which a single speaker who is a character other than the poet speaks and reveals his innermost personality. Lyric, the most simple poetic form perhaps, and epic. These were the major types of poetry as far as English poetry is concerned. British poetry and English poetry is concerned. I hope you have understood these types of poetry. If you have any kind of problems, you can always contact me. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and you also understood the types of poetry. Please share the link of this video, subscribe to the channel if you have not, and take care. Thank you so much for watching the other videos of my channel as well. Thank you once again.